Hi everyone, it's Henry here, and in this video I'm going to take you through how to paint up one of my favourite looking chapters of Space Marines, the Size of the Emperor. And I'm going to use that new Terminator Captain from the Leviathan box, which we got sent by Games Workshop for review. I've done a little bit of conversion work on it, which I'll cover at the start of the video, and then we'll go through the full paint process as well. It's quite a long video, this one, but I've wanted to do it for ages. I think it's a super cool model. I think it's a super cool scheme. I really like the chapter background, all the rest of it, so I guess there's a little bit of indulging here, but I do hope you enjoy it. So let's paint. So let's grab the sprue. As you can see, it's sort of a push fit kit, it does have pegs and whatnot, but I think most of the kits nowadays lack a fair amount of freedom when it comes to the build anyway, whether it's got the pegs or not. It's almost like the old way where you'd have to sort of saw up and cut up the model once it's fully made. Or certainly that's how I've been finding it. But it is a great pose to begin with. And I wanted to obviously use a scythe because it's Size of the Emperor. So I picked up this newish, couple of years now I think actually, they made this kit. This is a power size upgrade kit for the Death Guard from Horus Heresy. It's from Forge World. And I've got this cool combi melter here from the Ultramarines Praetor and Terminator armor. If you remember, I used a few bits from him on a video a while ago for the Augustus box, which I'll link up. Now, I messed up here. I totally thought it was a left hand on the power side, right hand rather, and it wasn't. It was a right hand, or the wrong hand. You know what I'm getting at. So I had to figure out how to get it out, and thank goodness, these Redgrass side cutters are incredible. I know like the Gundam crew use like ones like Tamiya ones, which are very similar to this, and some other obscure brands that I don't know the name of, but I presume they're all basically the same thing. They're just amazing. You can make such sharp precision cuts that you would often do with a knife, for instance, and I just love it. Like on the handle here, you see the little sort of, I don't know how to describe it, the little ribbed bits on the handle. I could clip those out individually and still be able to use them. They don't pinch or distort the plastic or anything like that. So it's not cheap, but I love it as a bit of kit. So all I did was chop the hand out the middle and then chop the sword off the sword arm, then put the hand through, and then I've drilled up through the bottom of the scythe, through the hand and through the top of the scythe. Now try and do this with it held together, and then you know the brass rod will line up as you do it, and then a little hole in the base of the shaft for the scythe, and then glued it together, and it's pretty solid. I'll use a tiny little bit of putty to fill the gaps, but that's it. The cloak, really kind of usefully, is one piece, and it's sort of attached to the back, as you can see like this. It's not actually going to be a problem for us to paint that separately, which is great. So sub-assembly wise, basically it's the arm, the other arm. Obviously I just chopped the storm bolter off and glued the combi bolter on there. So you've got the left arm, you've got the right arm, and then the back will be left unglued for now. I think that's about it really. The head, I've just used a helmet off one of the normal Terminators. I tried to find which one was looking left, and I took that one off and fitted it in. Didn't need to do any more with that. And the little purity seals that were hanging off his left shoulder tilt shield, I just snipped them off as well, because obviously they wouldn't hang correctly because of that angle. Now to start the yellow off, I'm going to choose a colour here called Dark Rust by AK. It's sort of a pinky brown colour, and I've deliberately chosen it because it's a little bit pink. I want this yellow to be quite vibrant, quite bright, and I normally start from a colder brown base or more of an orange brown base. So I thought I'd give it a little try and see what it's more like with this pinky colour. Not pure like magenta. I don't want the shadows to be like bright orange. But I really actually quite like the effect that it's given us. Now to pre-shade over the top of it, I was going to use Tamiya Flat White. And the weather over here at the minute is pretty warm, and it's pretty warm underneath the filming lights. And what I had was I mixed it all up properly, maybe 5 or 6 drops of thinner to paint, so Tamiya X20A thinner to paint. Left the airbrush in the airbrush holder, got the model, got everything ready, press record. And in that time, the paint had dried a little bit on the tip, as you can see there. And then what I did was, as soon as I pressed the air down, I had my airbrush pointing at the model, and it obviously blew off those little dots of paint. And that's what those spots were that we can see just on the chest of the Marine. So try and get in the habit of, before you spray onto your model, just spray off your model in case there's anything at the tip of the airbrush. I don't know why I didn't. It should be a habit by now, but it's a useful teaching point, right? When it goes when it goes like that. So I've got the Tamiya thinned right down, and I'm going to do a fairly simple pre-shade here, quite a drastic one, by which I mean I'm going to leave the dark areas really dark, the bright areas really bright, and not have too much in the way of a middle section. But I'll leave all the footage in for it. You notice mainly I'm moving the model, not the airbrush. I just wanted to say huge thank you for those of you that support us over on Patreon. It's going brilliantly. It's allowing myself and Andy to produce videos on here and over there each week. And it's allowing us to get some projects further down the line that you guys are going to see soon that are just awesome. And it allows us to do these videos, the videos that we want. We're not having to chase things. We're not having to do clickbait. We're not having to do anything like that. We can just create videos that we think are cool and will be useful and maybe help you enjoy your painting a little bit more. And we wouldn't be able to do it if it wasn't for your support. So huge thank you for that. Now for the yellow. If you've watched many of our videos, certainly the yellow ones, you'll know I'm a huge fan of the contrast paint yellows. They're basically like different coloured yellow inks. I've popped this in the airbrush, spraying 25 psi. I've thinned it about 50-50 with normal airbrush thinner. I'm always spraying about 25 psi. We're using a 0.4mm needle and nozzle, and this is our signature series Infinity by Harder and Steenbeck. But I tend to spray at that pressure with that brush for 99% of the work I do. Contrast dries much stronger than it goes on, so do one coat, let it dry, then apply the second coat. And I only needed 2 to get this lovely, bright, vibrant yellow. Now I'm going to knock this back a fair bit, so I wanted it to be pretty loud to begin with. Now I noticed a mould line I'd missed, so I just scratched it off with a knife there. I'm going to be using oils and mineral spirits in a minute, and what I don't want is those to get underneath the paint, because that will lift it away. So all I've done is put a little bit of gloss varnish over the top of that to basically seal it in. Grabbed 3 oil paints here to do a bit of oil paint rendering, which if you've watched again a few videos you'll know it's a technique I really enjoy. Normally I would pick a lighter colour than my main colour. I would pick a sort of colour in the middle that was close to my main colour, and then normally I pick a darker colour, often a brown, to try and create a little bit of sort of dirt and grime as well. In this case I kept them a bit closer together because I'm going to do more stages of weathering on this than I typically do in the videos. I'm not trying to like smash this out as quick as I possibly can. So I've just picked sort of 3 yellows here, as you can see. I've got a really soft bristle brush, and I've got an old brush to apply it with, I don't mind. And then in that little metal dish, we're going to put some mineral spirits. The idea behind this is you put little dots of oil paint all over the surface, and then we smoosh them together. Ideally in one direction, so pulling top to bottom as we look at it here. And what you create is this sort of faded, discoloured, weathered effect on the armour. It's an effect that military modelers have been using for donkey's years. And the bigger the thing, the cooler it looks, basically. But I just love doing it. So this, as I said at the start of the video, this Size of the Emperors, it's something I've wanted to do for ages. So it's just like, sod it, I'm going to do it anyway. Now when we come to blend it together, we don't want loads of mineral spirits on our brush. So I'm going to wipe off nearly all of it. You can see the brush is looking like that now. If we pop it on the card, you'll see basically it doesn't leave any streak. And we just want enough to get the paint moving. And if I have to re-wet the brush during this little panel, then I will, that's fine. You don't want to be pushing at any point because any abrasion is going to damage the paint underneath. But equally, you don't want to flood the surface and create a wash. Other than that little bit of gloss varnish where the scratch was, I'm not varnishing this, you don't need to. The mineral spirits won't react with the paint. The only issue you get is if they get underneath it. So if they find a crack or say the paint isn't dry, that's when you'll have the issues with the acrylic paint. And you can see already, particularly that light colour, light sand I think it's called, it will really just fade out the armour beautifully and give it this lovely lived in effect that I particularly enjoy when I look at it. So just from, a few minutes ago, and that's all it's took, is a few minutes to do this, we completely changed the look of this armour, and I'm loving it, which is a relief. This project's been interesting because I nearly quit on it a couple of times, so it's worth persevering. Now, we're going to have to do a little bit of masking now, due partly to the scheme. Size of the Emperor is a sort of a split scheme, but also I want to use my airbrush to do the cloak as well. So I am going to use gloss varnish here to protect the paintwork because I'm going to be handling it a lot. I'm going to be putting things like liquid mask over it. I just want to protect it. So I'm using Vallejo polyurethane gloss here. You use whatever gloss you like in your airbrush. Thin it as much as you need to spray it through and get a smooth coat. And I normally do 3 to 5 layers, something like that. And normally I would use a cocktail stick or a pin to apply it with. I couldn't find any to hand. I was really lazy, so I just used a bit of brass rod. And as you can see, it's going on rather heavily. You don't need to like be smushing it all on as much as I am here. You just need a thin layer over it to do the work. So as I say, I normally use a cocktail stick. I find that gives me the control, and I'm using Humbrol mask here. Most companies will make a liquid latex mask. I use the Humbrol one because that's what the railway modelers use, and they're a really good crowd when it comes to this type of material and technique and stuff. You know, they work with it probably a lot more frequently than we would do if you're predominantly a painter for wargaming miniatures. So we just get it all over, and once it's cured, it goes see-through, like you can see there. And that probably took, I don't know, half an hour, 45 minutes, something like that. So do it at the end of the hobby session, and then you can, you know, it'll be good when you come back to it. Now for the black, I've chosen Vallejo model colour black, one of my favourite black paints. I've had to thin it down a fair bit to get it to go through the airbrush. I don't know, maybe 3 drops of thinner for every drop of paint, something like that. Still spraying 25 psi, so it's all fine. I just want to get a nice smooth coat of that all over the areas that are going to be black. Obviously that liquid mask is protecting that yellow paintwork. And for the first highlight, I'm going to use Scale 75 Petroleum Grey. I often find the Scale 75 paints aren't that friendly to airbrush with. I think it's to do with the matting agent that makes them sort of so matte. But Petroleum Grey I haven't ever had issues with, and I really like the colour because it's got a little bit of purple in, and I think purple and yellow we know work well together. So I thought I'd go with that little bit of purple. Fairly broad highlights, but it'd be fine. And then for the final highlight, I'm going to use AK Reddish Grey and just do a tighter highlight with that. You see coming in here, just catching the top of that knee, top of the foot, up the side of the little thigh plate. I forget the name for them. My friend Ben's well into all his armour. He was having a rant about that the other day. Apparently that hip armour or whatever it's called on the new Apothecary is done really, really well. But it's done really poorly on lots of other stuff. But yeah, I'm sure he'll thank me for that. Now for the oil paint rendering for the black, I've chosen black, bitume, which is a sort of purpley brown colour, and neutral grey, which is a very light neutral grey colour. In hindsight, I don't think I needed the black on this. When I did the test paint job for this, I didn't use the black and it worked fine. I thought, oh, maybe I ought to put the black on. I have found with oil paints when I'm doing these, particularly when I'm doing this rendering, that the light colours seem to be really strong and can be quite overpowering. Turns out so can black, which is obviously the opposite end of the spectrum. So either I needed to use less of it, or just leave it out completely, and let the grey and the brown do their job of just making it a little bit more interesting. For the cloak, now whilst I wanted to indulge and paint something nicely, I also wasn't going to take forever to paint it. I only had a couple of days to do it, so using tools such as the airbrush where I can was essential, and the cloak is an obvious spot for this. So all I've done is base coated it black, and now I'm pre-shading it using flat white again, and I'm just holding it away from me so my airbrush is effectively the light from above. So we just keep layering it up and using that white to slowly brighten up the areas where the light is going to catch the most on that cloak. Again, we're not trying to do it in a one shot here. You know, there's multiple layers going on here, but because they're so thin, we're not losing any detail or anything like that. It's actually quite effective. I probably did the same again off camera then. You can see how bright it is. And I was going to do it red, and then I thought, got a bit of purple in the black. What happens if we do a bit of pink on the cloak? So I did Screamer Pink. I really like this colour at the minute. So I mixed it with a bit of Gavel Back just to knock it back a touch, and I tried Pink Cloak. And I didn't like it. But it's good to try these things. And it's also a good example of why the airbrush can be a very useful tool, because I don't need to strip this now. I don't need to do anything. I'm just going to spray straight over the top of it. Because the paint is so thin, we're not obscuring any detail. We're not getting a huge build-up of paint or anything. And I'm just going to spray red over the top, and it will act just the same as the pre-shade. You'll still have the areas of light and dark in enough quantity, or enough contrast rather, that it'll work absolutely fine. So I'm just using Blood Angels Red Contrast, Gave that, I think, 2 or 3 coats, if that. I mean, it actually gave it a nice little sort of pinky tint in the mid-tone areas as well, which was nice. Anything to add a little bit, because I'm not going to do much more to this cloak than airbrush it. This is one area I've chosen to save that little bit of time on. I think I'm always painting, particularly on YouTube, with this idea of army painting in mind. Just want to show recipes, show techniques, but also not ones that aren't unrealistic to get an army done with. The inside of the cloak, I was going to go red all round, but I saw a cloak on a marine recently, and I really liked that lighter sort of tan colour on the lining of the cloak. So I've base coated it. Base coast? It is very warm here at the minute, so you know, maybe that's what that's about. I've base coated it using Tamiya Flat Earth, which is a sort of brown colour, as you can see here. I'm not masking the back of the cloak here. You don't need to. Just it's got such funky angles on it. You just move it away from you so that you know that you can't spray on the back, and you'll get super tight lines, which you can see there, with no difficulty, no risk of danger or anything. Now I could do like bounce, reflected light and stuff off the ground and all that, but just going to make it look nice. So essentially I'm going to do kind of what I did with the white here, but I'm using deck tan, which is a very sort of, well, it's deck tan, so it's off-white colour. We're going to do the same here. So leaving the flat earth in the recesses and lighting the rest of it using the deck tan. And because, again, we're going to be handling this quite a lot, but also because I want to put transfers and things on in a bit, I'm going to give a nice heavy gloss coat to the cloak at this time. I don't often paint miniatures when I'm army painting anyway in sub-assemblies, but sometimes you just have to, and he's the captain, he's worth it. Now, time to take off the mask. Easiest way here, if you can't grab a little loose bit, just use a bit of blue tack to adhere to it, and then you can just peel it off and hope everything's worked okay. You'll nearly always need to do a tiny bit of touch-up, but to be honest, a dark brown does the job regardless of the colour, because it will just look like a bit of shading, or a bit of damage. Not worth stressing over. Obviously, if it's a display piece and all that, take your time. But as you saw earlier, I did not take my time when I was putting that liquid mask on. Now the whole model is going to get good few coats of gloss varnish there, and the helmet clearly wasn't secured in well enough because the air pressure just blasted it out. So this is because we're going to do some decals and we're going to do a little bit of oil washes as well. So this is to create a really smooth surface for both those processes to go over. Nothing to do with protection. In this case, this is to create a smooth surface. So I'll link up in the top a video dedicated to decals, but all I've done here is glossed, then I've applied the decals, microsol, then I've glossed over them again, and I haven't done a final varnish yet because I want to do an oil wash over the model, and I want that to go over the transfers as well. Now, burnt umber, the light brown you see here is what Absalom call burnt umber, but all the other burnt umbers I've had are much darker. I particularly like the Winsor Newton Artist Oil Colour burnt umber. That's always been my go-to for years. I'm using these Absalons more and more now though, because they dry very quickly, which is very helpful when I'm doing the videos. But I don't think they're quite as good for pin washing. But they're fine. They'll do the job. So all I did was darken it down using another colour called Shadow Brown. And you can see here that capillary action, and again I'll post a link up in the top here for a video dedicated to pin washing using different products, oils, enamels, acrylics, all that sort of thing. But you can see that capillary action occurring where that lack of surface tension and the fact that our wash is a mineral spirit base, an alcohol base, a solvent base rather, it just wicks it off the brush into those recesses. But what I'm also going to do is use, you can see I'm deliberately covering the whole surfaces here. I haven't got a brush with a sharp point and I'm just aiming at the recesses. I want to cover the whole of the panels with a very thin filter of this brown, and the reason for that is I think it gives a really nice filter across transfers and stuff and helps set them into the paint job. Now I satined varnish. Once that wash was dry, I then satin varnished the model. I forgot to film that stage, that's why that little thing just came up. And now it's time for some edge highlighting come battle damage, sort of tippy tappy chipping. And all I've got here is an off-white called Ice Yellow, so it's a very, very light yellow colour. And I've got that on my palette, and I've got some of the Bad Moon Yellow contrast paint on my palette, and I'm just mixing it together to create different tones of that yellow. And I'm just taking my time, edge highlighting and tapping along the edges just to create a really sort of gnarly, scratched up look. And for the black, I'll do exactly the same. I've just added the ice yellow into the reddish grey, which was the lightest colour we used when we did the black armour. And the other chipping colour I'm going to use here is black, particularly over the decals. I think it really, really helps, again, just set them into the paint job, put a little bit of damage over them. I've used a few on the back of the cloak there as well, just to give it a little bit of detailing. But it's probably the longest process in the whole thing. But what I love, I'm so happy with the result here. It was just before this stage I was going to ditch it all. And it was just because I'd put a matte varnish on and I thought it looked crap. As soon as I put satin varnish on, I really loved it. The little connective bits of ribbing and stuff, I just gave a grey highlight to. I think it was Skavenblight Dinge, it didn't really matter, just a different grey to the armour. Now for the purity seals, which this guy has quite a few of, I guess he's captain, you know, he needs his shopping lists and stuff. I've base coated them using US Olive Drab, one of my favourites, and then I'm mixing in Karak Stone. And I wanted to try doing the purity seals this time without doing any writing on them. Now, I really like doing writing on purity seals, but I thought this was an opportunity to see if a different technique might work. So as I'm highlighting them, I'm just constantly going to do these dashes across them. And I'll keep adding Karak Stone in as I do that. And my hope is by doing that, you sort of create this kind of texture to them, and at a glance maybe looks like it has very, very fine script on it. I think I quite like the result. Let me know in the comments whether you think it's effective or actually whether you think it does need some text over the top of it. And this is just pure Karak Stone we're getting towards now with them. For the seals themselves, because I was going to have quite a lot of red on the rest of the model, I wanted to do the wax seal a different colour, and Baraknar Burgundy is one of my favourites. So I've just used that to base coat it with, mixed in a bit of the ice yellow to create a highlight colour. So I'm going to use that ice yellow, now it's on my palette, basically to be the highlight for that I mix in to create the highlight for everything else, just for expediency. For his Crux Terminatus, there's already quite a lot of metallics on the model, like gold and stuff, and I'm not loving them at the moment, so I didn't want to put more on there. And I'm sure in the past I've seen it where these have been like stone, which I think looks really cool. So I've just got the colours that were on my palette and mixed them up to make various greys, and then I'm just splodging them over each other to create an irregular sort of finish. It's not necessarily marble exactly, but it's just meant to look like a stone. And once I was happy with that, I gave it a little green wash. I think this was a Thonian camo shade. It's basically just a very light green wash just to tint it a little bit. And once it was dry, I put some matte varnish over it as well, just with a brush. Now here's where I started veering away from the way I often paint my own models. I like very limited palettes, and guns generally I do black or silver, but I fancy doing something different, I guess. So I went with red, and I base coated the combi bolter with Khorne Red, and then I've layered it up with Mephiston Red. Quite bright but quite boring, which is exactly what I wanted. Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to describe that. And then again, to highlight it, some tippy-tappy chips, and I've just mixed in the ice yellow into the Mephiston. And I was umming and ahhing about what colour to do his Imperialis on his chest. And as far as I can tell, you know, they're a Primaris only chapter now, but as far as I can tell, you still have companies and things like that. So I've used the old company designation where the chest, the Imperialis, would be denote the company. And I thought red would look really nice to a third company. I think I'm fine with the idea that a third company or fourth company, fifth company, whatever captain would have access to Terminator armour. I think it seems in the lore now that calls, you know, bringing back all these different kinds of armour and stuff. Anyway, it's easier to make. So I'm at peace with a third company captain being in Terminator armour. Then for the metals, I have base coated the gold in the wondrous decayed metal. I have highlighted it using Necro Gold, both of those by scale 75. I wanted to keep the gold nice and dark. You know, the model's already pretty loud, so I wanted to keep it pretty chilled out. And my favourite way of doing metals is to use an enamel wash over them. So this is called panel liner for brown and green. It's just a browny green enamel wash. Don't worry about the name. If it's the right colour, it's the right colour. And I've just got a little dish of mineral spirits. This isn't necessarily going to be the best way to apply it, but it's pretty quick, and it's how I do it. Rather than decanting it all out and doing all that, which I would do if it was a tank and there was loads of it on, but there's not, there's a tiny bit on. So I just wet it in the mineral spirits, dip it in the pot, and see how it looks like when I put it on the model. And if it's too thick, then I'll put more mineral spirits on. As simple as that. And again, we haven't needed to varnish to protect or anything like that. As long as the paint underneath is dry, you're not going to have any issues. And all the metals will just get this enamel wash over them. The biggest downside, other than the smell, is it takes a while to dry. So I left that overnight to do its job. And then when it was dry, I came back and gave a final highlight with a nice bright gold. This was Elven Gold, again by scale 75. And I've done exactly the same thing for the silvers. I've just used a dark silver, giving it that enamel wash, and then a bright silver to give it a final highlight. For the eye lenses, this is something I did ages ago on a Mantis Warriors Terminator, and I really, really loved the effect. It's by no means OSL, it's maybe a tiny bit gimmicky, but for the amount of effort, I think it's well worth it, the result. So I'm going to base coat it using white, and I'm making sure here to get that white into the recess around the lens. Then I'm going to apply 2 coats of Hexwraith Flame. It's part of the contrast range now. Once it's dry, I'll apply the second one, and you can see by having the white in that recess around the eye, where the Hexwraith Flame has settled, we've got that nice darker green. And then in the middle of the eye, I've just mixed white with Tesseract Glow, an old technical paint, again, I believe now part of the contrast paint range. It's basically neon green ink. Mix that in with the white to make it a bit more solid, so it's easy to paint with. And then just paint it in the centre of the lens with that. And I think, I mean, I love the effect. I think it's awesome for the amount of effort. I think it's fab. Not much more to do on him now. The scythe obviously is a focal point of the model. I wanted to keep it quite agricultural. I mean, that's why their Scythes the Emperor, their home world was this farming planet and all the rest of it. So I thought I'll give it a nice sort of old wooden haft to it. For that, I've just base coated it, mixed a brown and a grey. I can't remember which ones, it doesn't matter. And then just mixed in the ice yellow to lighten that mix up, and just start painting squiggly lines to create that wood grain. And once you're happy with it, I've given it a thin glaze of snakebite leather contrast paint to bring a bit of that sort of brown wood colour into it. So I put it on my palette, and then I thinned it down heavily with water, took the majority off my brush. And you see here, I'm just starting at one end and then pulling it all the way to the other, just once. And when it's dry, that's the effect it gives you. And I really like that. I kind of wanted it to keep it that humble agricultural sort of look to it. So the same I've done for the metal. Very, very simply, I've just used a burnt iron metal colour series here with the enamel wash over, and then a bright silver edge highlight. I haven't gone for any power effects. I don't hate them by any means. I think they're a great way to add colour and interest into miniatures. But for this, I wanted to keep the side deliberately quite plain. And then one final little thing I'm going to do, little finishing touch, is do a few little oil streaks here. So I'm using a dark brown oil, which I'm just going to touch on the little dots around where I've got any damage. Then I'm going to use a brush that I've wetted with mineral spirits, take the excess off, gently press them against those dots and draw downwards to create the streak. And then I can go in and just tidy them up and reshape them with a sharper brush. And I think I've done maybe 6 across the whole model, and I've just made sure I've done them over areas where it will show up. So you're sort of just telling people as they glance at it, oh, there is some damage in here. But it's not tons, but I think it's enough. And for my current taste, this is how I like them to look. And here he is done. A nice simple base, just how we do most of the YouTube video bases. I'll pop the powders down that I used, but I like plain bases anyway. I think he's come out great. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I hope you've liked sort of the result, but it's not often that I'm really pleased with how something comes out on here, and this is an exception. Of course, there's things that I would tweak. I think possibly I could go in and give his cloak a matte varnish just to change the finish on that to the finish we got on his armour. I think that would probably be a nice extra touch. Perhaps that's something I'll go back in and do at some point. The decals that I've used for his shoulder guard, if you just Google size of the Emperor decals, lots of places you can find them now. I got mine from the Mighty Brush. I don't know if they still do them, but they're not hard to get hold of now. Printing's come on so much the last few years. But I think the decal work on this I'm really pleased with. It took half an hour maybe of just sort of selecting the right things, cutting them out and layering them up, getting them how I wanted them. But it was worth it. This is certainly something you could achieve in a week's worth of hobby sessions, which I think for a character is great. A similar amount of time on this as I would on a whole Marine Terminator unit, because you wouldn't have the cloak and the extras and stuff like that. So I think 2 weeks for that is pretty cool. And I won't lie, I am massively tempted to try that really small combat patrol they've shown us, which is basically the Terminators and some of the Flamer dudes from Leviathan, and that's it. Very, very tempting to do that. If you'd like to see that, let me know in the comments. I don't think I'll do a video, but I might do it and take some photos and stuff. But it'd be nice to add into the combat patrols that we've completed recently. So yeah, if you've got any questions about the paint job itself, how you might change it or tweak it, how you could do it for your sort of chapter, just let me know in the comments. I'll always do my best to get back to you as soon as I can. So thanks ever so much for the support. Hugely appreciate it. If you've enjoyed the video, hit the like button. If you're not already, subscribe so you don't miss out on any future content. And I'll see you next time. If you've liked any of the models in this video and you fancy having an army of them yourself, but perhaps you don't have the time or wherewithal to get it done, consider dropping us an email at commissions@cultofpaint.com and maybe Ben can sort you out.